Hi, everyone, and welcome to One Voice Evolving podcast, where we reclaim joy in DEI spaces, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here we interview guests who are raw, real, and relatable, shifting the conversation from head to heart for women who care about racial equity. I'm Kim Brasser, your host. This week, our guest is Susan McCuistion, who holds an MS in statistics from University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and is a registered member of the Oneida Nation. Her visionary approach, mathematical mind, and inclusively passionate heart led her to become president of daiOne LLC, spelled DAIONE, which is an anagram of her tribe, Oneida. Susan is author of the #1 international best-selling book, The D Word, 12 Steps to Diversity Recovery, and pioneered an online conference, New Diversity Summit, even before online conferences were cool. I know you'll enjoy her conversational style and practical application in our two-part podcast, finding a balanced approach to our very personal journeys. Like, comment, and share, and be sure to visit our website, onevoiceevolving.com/resources for her recommendations. Enjoy. Go. Good morning, Susan. It is so wonderful to have you here with us today, and we're honored to be sharing this space with you. I think that, at One Voice Evolving, our whole point here is to just look behind the curtain of the presenter. And so I'd like for you to kind of start with telling us what inspired you to get into this work that you've been doing now for 25 years.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it, and this opportunity to get involved with the new audience. I really love the work that you're doing and others in this space as well. So for me, this has really been a lifelong journey. When you look at me, you see a white woman because I am. What you wouldn't know also, though, is that I'm Native American. I'm a registered member of the Oneida Nation. And so when I was growing up, it was middle school. And I was told, write your autobiography. It was a school assignment, write your autobiography. And so I kind of started with I'm Swedish and Native American because my grandma on my dad's side was an immigrant from Sweden, and my dad could tell me all about that. And he did. And so I go to my mom to learn about the Native American part, and she wouldn't talk about it. So my dad grabs me, he's like, come here. We go over to the bookshelf. He pulls out a book, opens it up. Inside it is my mom's birth certificate. And my dad's pointing to the line that says race. And he's going like this, you're half, you're half. And I'm like, half what? Right. You got to remember, I'm like, what, 12, 13 years old, right? So indignant teenager, preteen, whatever. Half what, Dad? And on the line next to race on my mom's birth certificate, it says red. Okay. So I grew up in a middle-class white neighborhood. I wasn't any different than any of my friends. And now I'm seeing this. I'm also hearing that my mom doesn't want to talk about it. And, we all know that's a goofy age. Like our identities are really starting to come together at that, middle school, 12, 13, 14-year-old age. And I just started thinking, oh my gosh, I'm different. And why doesn't mom want to talk about it? Is it what's the secret? Is there a secret? Is this something I should be ashamed of? What's going on? And so it was at that age that I think I really started to think about it, quite a young age, really started to think about what's this mean for my identity and all of this. And to keep the long story short, I learned, along the way, and my mom started to open up, and there's a whole family history on her side of systemic issues and things like that. But that really started the journey for me. When I was in college, I actually thought I wanted to be a mathematics teacher. By education, I'm a mathematician. And when I was in college, one of the courses I took was a qualitative mathematics course. So we had to basically kind of write a report based on, interviews and observations and things like that. So what I decided to do was actually start to look at how Black students and white students learned math differently, or if there were ways in which they learned mathematics differently. And I had the advantage at the university I was at that they actually had a program where they brought some inner city kids from Chicago who had the grades, but not the test scores to get into university. And they put them through a program for the first 2 years to kind of catch them up so they could complete their matriculation at university. So those classes, while mixed, were largely African American and Hispanic, having come from the inner city of Chicago. And so I was able to work through it that way. And that's really where I started to get interest in this, as I interviewed those students and started to learn more about their background and things like that. And so that's all. It's kind of been a lifelong journey. I had, a manager. I really wanted to get into it, and I had a manager who, gave me the opportunity to get into it, and I've been doing that now for 25 years.
And so you've been doing it in educational spaces or organizational spaces or?
All of that. I used to work, when I started doing the official work, I was at a large consulting firm, Hewitt Associates. Actually, unfortunately, through all the, through the years and whatever, it's gotten sold out, and it's now actually part of Aon. But I was the original diversity consultant at Hewitt Associates. And so I have worked with Fortune 500 organizations. I've worked with across industries. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of training, facilitating, and coaching throughout corporate America, throughout educational areas, pretty much you name it.
And how has that changed now that DEI is almost a bad word in academic circles, for example?
Yeah.
And you've lived through some iterations of over your course of your career. What do you see as the difference now, but from when you came in, even if it's just in the shift in your mindset?
Yeah, it's a hard question, because I want to say there's a difference. And honestly, I really don't see much of a difference. And that's the part that breaks my heart. There needs to be a difference. And that's really what I've tried to drive through for my work. How do we change what we're doing so we actually solve some issues? We all know there's, a hot thing in the news, a Black African American person gets shot or beaten by police, right? It makes the news, and it's hot news for 5 minutes. Okay. And every time that would happen, I would think, oh my gosh, this is going to make the difference. People are finally going to start to get it. Right. And then it would go away. And then COVID came, and actually almost, I think we just passed the 4th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. COVID came, and we were all inside, and we all had to witness it. And it carried a little bit longer. The after effects carried a little bit longer. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is really finally going to be it. It's really finally going to be it. And for a while it was. And sadly, my experience and the experience of some of my colleagues is that has gone away as well. So I don't know how we get this fixed. There are studies out there that show, right, the systemic issues that we've got within, corporate America, within, even just, home lending, right? Discrimination. We see these, we know these studies, and yet people just look away. They don't want to hear that about it, about the issues. And I think there's a lot that lies underneath that. And we don't have enough conversations. That's what, when I said in the beginning, I love what, what you're doing, what Nikki's doing, that you're having conversations about this. Because we're afraid to have conversations. We're afraid we're going to ask the wrong question, or we're going to look stupid, or things like that. But if we don't talk about it, how are we going to know? How are we going to know? I'll just kind of stop there for a minute.
One of the things, when you and I set this up, we know each other through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
And we joked about it being called Haters Gonna Hate,
because
because the world before the pandemic, the social media was almost a safe container to bring ideas. And
Yeah.
since the pandemic has been a whole nother layer of haters gonna hate.
Mhm.
And there are people leaving social media spaces and going
Mhm.
behind paywalls now
Yeah.
because so they can have that safe container and connect with people about what's real and have these conversations. Because when you put something out there that the majority folk don't like, or the crowd, they will come in and do everything they can to deconstruct the truths
Yeah.
that you're trying to talk about. Your book, Compassionate Diversity, is one of the first ones I've seen that has a post-pandemic even take on it. That said, and then the pandemic happened, and what that does to people's ability for empathy and for compassion and for communication. And it isn't just in the ones who are coming up through. I see it in the ones of any age. And part of why I started this podcast is because really qualified, quality people are exhausted from trying to get a message out there that takes more energy than it's worth. And so they have moved behind a paywall. They've left completely. And I'm hoping that by bringing people like you on, who are in various stages, we can continue to share a message that says, how do we revive this dream? And is it really a pipe dream, or is it possible? Dr. Nikki says, that we can, the vision is to create a world in which racism can't live. And and if you don't believe it's possible, we did once 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you square that? I loved your book, by the way. I have
Oh,
read it
thank you.
backward and forward now.
Thank you. Thank you so
I
much.
think it's great. I think it's great because of the way it talks about white privilege in a factual but non-threatening manner,
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah.
touchy that way.
Yeah.
And I love the way your mind works, that mathematical technical part and the heart that you have and the passion for the work is such a good marriage for the platform that we want to build.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate that. I we're going through some churning here. And one of the examples, I always think about it's some chaos, right?
Yeah.
Think about, butterflies, just becomes such a typical example now, right? I mean, a caterpillar has to melt down into mush in that chrysalis before it can reorganize itself into a beautiful butterfly and emerge that way. So I'm a Pollyanna. I think I even say that in the book. I am a Pollyanna. I want to believe that what we're going through is the mush so that we can reorganize and come out in that world, that Dr. Nikki, that we all envision, that connectedness that we have. We are all connected as human beings. And again, more studies about that disconnection and how detrimental it is for our health and well-being, even as much as some of the more typical kind of things like smoking, right? Hate and discrimination. I try to look at things holistically. Hate and discrimination, certainly they affect the victim the most, and we need to take care of that and take care of them when that happens. And we also know there are, again, health effects on perpetrators in counties, especially in the Southern United States, where we know that a lot of this discrimination is, widespread. Those counties themselves, when we remove other factors, actually have, again, higher what's the word I'm looking for, blood pressure, hypertension, right? Issues of that and other things as well, with both Blacks and whites. When we look at the people who observe this, right, our brain takes in information through these mirror neurons. And so when we see somebody doing something, our brain acts as if we're doing it. That's how our brain can recognize the things that we're doing. And so We've got the victim who is hurt, body and mind and soul. We've got the perpetrator who has, now is just as hurt when we think about how some of that rises up too. And just think about that kind of brain that has to dehumanize another human being to the point that they're willing to do what they do to people. It's painful. It's painful. And then the people who witness this, it's like it's happening. Their body is reacting. The chemicals in their body is reacting like it's happening to them. So for those people who watch that murder of George Floyd over and over again, their bodies, their reactions were, whether they were like right there in the day or watching the video, it was taking all of that in as well. And so we are all connected. I just want to be clear, the intent is not to excuse any of these actions, and yet we have to recognize that we live in a system. And when one piece of the system is harmed or hurt for whatever reason, the rest of the system is affected. And we have to look at this holistically, and I don't think we have. We've spent so much time going us and them, and we get to the polarization where we're at now and the arguing and, all this. It goes back to, I think, one of my, I don't think I know, chapters is about how diversity isn't a win-lose proposition, but we've turned it into that, right? And we have to start to recognize where's, how is this win-win? We need to know that, yeah, when we fix things for one group or one community of people, it actually fixes it for everybody in the long term. We all benefit in the long term because we're a system.
So family systems, a lot of my work is based on family systems. And what you just described is what John Bradshaw did with his little hanging unit. If there's an alcoholic and family, what affects one affects all, and the whole system needs treatment. And that makes me think about generational trauma. So when you're 13 and your mother, is red, and what kind of, and we know now how DNA works and how things are passed through generations. And some of today's reactivity, I believe, is because of 4, 6, 8, 1880 generations of trauma that just keep getting passed on. I don't know why I'm afraid of water. I just am. Well, my mom was terrified. Well, guess what? So was her mother, because one time there was a flood or something. It's real. And you're a heart math certified or practitioner or something? Yeah. How is there anything about generational trauma in that messaging or that program?
Interestingly, there may be a study about it, but off the top of my head, I can't recall. But heart math has become really important for me and compassionate diversity, because what it does is, so first off, we haven't already figured out, and you probably know from reading my book, but just for the listeners, that math side of me is very scientific. And so I really try to meld as I go through this. I talked about the brains and the neurons and the mapping and all that kind of stuff. But what I love about heart math is the science side of it. I really try to marry that, the science side into it, because that's part of my love as well. And that's what I love about heart math is, they've shown that, when we get frustrated, it's because this connection between our heart and our brain is cut off. Okay. We know through science, there is more information going from our heart to our brain than vice versa. And we just don't talk about that anymore. We talk about the brain, we talk about the brain. And so, when I think about the damage that we're doing, it's because we've cut off this heart. How can you discriminate and harm people who are different from you if your heart is involved? You can't. You can't. And so you've got to make this connection between your heart and your head to help recognize, okay, wait a minute, we are all human and we have different wants and needs and perspectives. We all do want to be respected and the way that we show respect, our behavior around it may be very different. And maybe this person isn't disrespecting me. I see somebody acting differently and my brain goes, oh, they're disrespecting me. Okay, wait a minute. Connecting here. You know what? Maybe they're showing me respect, but in a way I'm not familiar with. How do we find out more? How do I have a discussion with this person about this to make sure that, yeah, there are these values that we share, like respect, and yet there are these differences in the way we may show respect, in the way we communicate. Are we direct or indirect communicators? Are we more emotionally expressive? Are we more emotionally restrained? There's strained folks look at the expressive stuff and say, calm down. You're not being professional, right? And yet the expressive folks are like, what are you trying to hide? You don't care about this, right? And they're just different ways. We all feel emotion. Every human being feels emotion. The difference is in the way it's expressed. And it's the difference that we see and the difference that we judge from our own perspective. And that's why we have to have these conversations to start to learn about other experiences and other perspectives. So we have the ability to go, okay, wait a minute. Maybe they're not being threatening because they're expressing their emotion. Maybe that's all they're doing. They're just frustrated. Okay, you know what? I hear you. I hear that you're frustrated. Help me understand what you're frustrated about. Do you mind sharing more with me about that?
So you open the dialogue
Yeah.
one-on-one with open-ended questions. Not why would you say that? Why always means I don't think you should.
Yes.
So you're going to get a defensive reaction. When you are, and this is the part, when you are triggered because you feel disrespected, whether or not that's the reality of the situation, your feeling is fact in that moment.
Absolutely.
What do you do to give yourself the space to be able to come back to that conversation when you're not triggered? Because what happens online is people are typing before they're thinking, because you can't think and feel at the same time. It's one or the other proposition. So how do we help people shift from head to heart and then back to their logical executive function to have further dialogue?
Yeah. So I really don't remember if I put this part in the book, but I actually wrote a blog a few years ago about like my rules for social media engagement, which kind of usually start with don't.
Right.
Well, because we lose the fact that there's a person at the other end when we're not looking at them, right? And so, for me personally, what I try to do is recognize that, okay, wait a minute, this person's frustrated. If I'm feeling, it takes a lot of emotional intelligence, Kim, excuse me, and a lot of practice. Excuse me. If I'm feeling frustrated, if I'm reading something, I don't know if that's really the way that person wrote, or if it's just the way I read it. I was in a class years ago, and I'm never going to forget it. It was a communications class, and the professor walked in and he goes, I didn't say I don't like her. I didn't say I don't like her. I didn't say I don't like her, right? And he continued, until he got to, I didn't say I don't like her. So every single one of those words, if we emphasize that sentence differently, has a completely different meaning. And so when we're reading something, even in just email from somebody, I always try to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm reading this with my filter. Yes. They may have meant it angrily. I don't know, but I need to understand what's going on here. And so, responding to somebody in social media is, I have to understand they're responding from their place of pain. And they don't recognize it. And I think, honestly, Kim, that's why I've really started to shift more to how much this work is about me.